it's everything goes into slow motion. That's how I felt. It was like slow motion, everything kind of turned gray. It's like, is this really real? They were trying to find the baby's heartbeat, couldn't find the baby's heartbeat. And then she's like, kind of got quiet. I was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, and they don't tell you right away. And I just knew in the pit of my stomach something was wrong.
Yeah, well, a lot of times when you go through things like that, you don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. You don't know how to feel. You don't know how to think. And as a dad and as a father, as a husband, you don't know how to guide this process. Hey guys, welcome to the Bottom Line with the Baldovinos. Today we're going to be talking about how to go through hard things. Every one of us are going to go through challenging seasons, challenging moments, whether it's in relationship or your health or other people's health, people that you love, or you're going to lose a job or lose a client, some things that are going to be really, really, really hard. And we want to talk about those things. And we're going to actually open up about our own lives. So we've been married for 28 years. And in those 28 years, we've had some great highs, some great lows, and everything in between where life is lived out. And well, for you and I, we've gone through some of those things. But I'm just going to pick on one for our conversation together today, is that in December 21st, 2012, we lost our son.
Yes.
And in that season, we were busy. We had 5 kids, 5 little ones running around, school things, family stuff going around. But also we had a growing ministry. I was actually in the middle of writing my first book, and then I get a phone call. So I want to start there because I want to unpack how are we supposed to go through hard things? What does the Bible say how to go through hard things, how to overcome it, and still be strong in our faith with Jesus, trusting in Jesus? How do we do all this and unpack it? So why don't we start on that day that you called me and you were pregnant. You were 16 weeks pregnant.
Yeah. So December 21st, 2012, it was actually the first of 2 pregnancy losses, which was really surprising for us considering we had 5 very healthy pregnancies and 5 little kids with relatively no issues with those pregnancies. So I was well into the second trimester, or at least a few weeks in, when I went in for a routine appointment. I actually went in, it was just me, and I had one little kid with me. And they were trying to find the baby's heartbeat, couldn't find the baby's heartbeat. And then she's like, kind of got quiet. And I was like, is there something wrong? And I remember her saying, we're going to bring you into ultrasound. I was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, and they don't tell you right away. And I just knew in the pit of my stomach something was wrong. And you talk.
Well, I received a phone call.
Yeah, so I called you, and they brought me down to the ultrasound area, and I had called you and said, hey, something's wrong. I don't know what's wrong. And I remember you saying, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think they can find the baby's heartbeat, because they hadn't been direct with me at that point. I didn't really know.
Or pretty vague.
And so you came, and we went into the ultrasound room together, and they told us that the baby no longer had a heartbeat. And I know a lot of people go through miscarriages and pregnancy loss, but I think for me as a mom, and probably you too, it was kind of a shock, just because it was like we never had really gone through some kind of loss like that before. And I was just whirling, had all kinds of thoughts. And I remember really thinking, let's pray and let's see this baby's heartbeat come back, and I feel like we did do that. And then we texted a bunch of people and we started to contend, and, I don't know, but it's mostly when you start to hear something like that, it's everything goes into slow motion. That's how I felt. It was like slow motion, everything kind of turned gray. It's like, is this really real? And here you are pregnant still, and my body wasn't going into a miscarriage state. So the baby had probably been in there like that with no heartbeat for probably a few weeks, is what they had told me by the time he came out. But yeah, I mean, what did you feel about that? What was that like for you? Cause I only know for from my standpoint, what it felt like. And I just remember those first few minutes were really emotional.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times when you go through things like that, you don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. You don't know how to feel. You don't know how to think. And as a dad and as a father, as a husband, you don't know how to guide this process. And I think that's kind of what I also want to unpack in a little bit here. How do I process something that's challenging so that I can actually overcome? Because a lot of times in situations like this is where a lot of mistakes are done. A lot of blaming is done. And they're failing even to build their faith and walk this out. So for me, when I received that phone call, I didn't know what to do. I'd never experienced anything like this. We had never lost anything like this before in our life. At that point, I had lost a grandfather. That's it. And my grandmother, I didn't know really because I was little when I lost my grandmother. But I didn't have any loss in my life. Everything was great. And so to go through that, I didn't. No one had ever talked to me about it. No one ever helped me out and stuff like this. So I didn't know the process. So I did ask the Lord, what do I do? How can I guide this? And initially right away was, well, I trust you. That was my cry to the Lord at that very moment was, I trust you, God. So I didn't know what else to say in that hospital room, and losing her, like I held them and everything.
Well, maybe we should tell a little how that went,
Sure.
because we don't mind sharing that. I think it's actually good because a lot of people don't talk about pregnancy loss and miscarriage. And I think, and we even had advice told us over the years, like, don't share that you're that you're pregnant in case you lose the baby. Don't share before 12 weeks. And I guess we always had kind of this idea that this is a life and we want to celebrate this life, right? Even if we were to lose it, like as long as we have this baby, And so in this case, it was like, okay, all the things that you actually believe are kind of coming to a head. You start to realize what's going on inside of you, right? You start to feel all these emotions and all these questions and all of this. And I think what was an anchor for me, even though I never had in that moment kind of a gut reaction that I would blame this on God. I think a lot of people do feel that though. It's like, okay, are we going to blame this on God? Mine was more, I started going through all these things in my mind. Like, oh, maybe I worked out too much, or maybe I didn't work out enough, or maybe I didn't eat enough protein, or maybe my healthy fats wasn't high enough, or maybe I wasn't, you kind of just go through this thing of like, down the line of where did I make a mistake? Because this is my body. And I felt like a little bit like my body failed me. I guess I didn't feel so much like God failed me, but at the same time, it was like, I needed to get through this with the Lord. And so big anchor for me, I remember, because my body wasn't going into miscarrying or into labor naturally, initially, we had to go home and sit like that. It was like 3 days of sitting like that. And then my body started to, go into like a labor. And we had the baby. We held him in our hand, which I was terrified of what that was going to feel like. It's like, I think in some ways it's easier maybe for some people who miscarry, who you don't see, what it was. It's like, but no, we were faced, this is a baby. I remember he was fit in the palm of our hand. We have photos. We got to see that it was a boy, which we have, for those of you who don't know, we have 5 boys right now and 1 girl. So that would have been another boy. And he had perfect little fingers and toes and all of that.
And we named him and everything.
Yep. And we named him Benjamin.
And we had a funeral.
Yeah. And
all the kids wrote letters. Mm-hmm. So I think all that was important for the process also for our kids, because they had already were in celebration mode. Yeah, they're all in celebration mode. We're having a new baby coming to our family. So now we have to also guide them, because we're going to model this situation for them. And we're going to help them navigate this and for me, it's to look at God rightly. Because a lot of times we look at God wrongly in these types of things, or we have expectations that God should be taking care of our family. God, I'm doing your work in ministry. You should be taking care of my family. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the mindset. And so when things go wrong, money-wise or some other situation, we're going to blame God for it. So let me just break that down a little bit. Because when we go through hard things, the Bible says to consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And so we're going to have a lot of them, all shapes and sizes. They're going to be in various ways: health, relationships, marriage, finances, business, ministry, people, family members. You're going to go through hard things, trials.
Yep.
And we're supposed to consider it pure joy. And then it goes on to talk about, you talk about this all the time, the progression of going through a challenge, what it does to us and for us. Mm-hmm. It's going to work on our behalf. But I think where we start off in the wrong foot is that when things happen, you either blame God, you either blame the devil, you blame yourself, you blame other people, or you blame it on, and hopefully you're going to look at it even like this is the natural world that we live in, the broken world that we live in.
Like the fallen world or sin in the world or just
yes.
the way it is.
So those are the 5 areas that you can go and start, okay, this is this, this is this, this is this, or this is this.
And in some ways it is one of those things, but we usually have a natural bent to just pick on one.
Right.
Or 2.
Right. And so for me, no matter what, I trust God. No matter what scenario, no matter who it is at fault, I got to lean back on God. I got to lean on and trust him because I'm not going to get through this alone. Mm-hmm. So he is my light. He is my shield. He is my help. He is my guide to walk this thing out, whatever it is. So I would say that no matter what, that's your foundation. That was definitely mine. It still is, even when I go through hard things. But second, if it is my fault, I still got to lean on God. Mm-hmm. If it's someone else's fault, I still got to lean on God. If it's the devil's fault, I got to lean on God. And I just I have not, in any situation that I've ever gone through, blamed God.
Well, this is something that's interesting because I feel like I felt this in this trial. And I know lots of people go through things that are much worse, some things that are less severe. So sometimes when you're going through something hard, it's like I have this kind of tendency to be like, oh, I don't really have a right to be sad about this or upset about this because people lose children that get hit by a car or they lose a parent early, or there's all these scenarios that you can kind of be like, that's worse, so mine's lesser, or this is common. But I feel like, grief is part of the human experience. It's one of the things we're going to go through is loss, right? And when we go through grief or loss or something hard like that, any kind of trial, it seems like, at least for me, I remember you get faced with this crossroads. It's like you either get to choose leaning into God more and going that direction, or you choose going down the path of staying grieving maybe too long, or maybe you go down depression.
Or you get bitter.
Yep, you can get bitter. There's lots of different things that can happen. And I'm not saying you don't go through the grief, because grief is a natural emotion you need to go through, but it usually comes in waves. But if you don't decide ahead of time, like, I'm going to trust God. And I think when you said to me, I remember birthing that little baby, that tiny little baby, and you're like, Christelle, we were holding him. And I remember you saying these words. It's probably one of the only things I remember, like very distinct. You're like, say with me, God, I trust you. So we're holding this little baby with no life, saying these words. I'm sure they were, the hospital staff were probably looking at us like, what are you doing? But it was the beginning of a choice that wasn't really necessarily lined up with our emotions, I'd say. I didn't feel like overwhelming trust for God. It was a choice of trusting him at that moment that, when you choose the right thing, even if your emotions aren't there, it's like it gives room through, really, I believe, obedience, but through the Holy Spirit to come in and help you go down the path that leans into God in your pain, and lean into God in the trial, lean into God in your grief. And I think that for us, this principle plays out in any type of, trial, big or small. It can be applied, right? It's like leaning into God, and you have to actually almost decide that on the front end. Like, no matter what happens in life, this is what I'm doing. And I just thought that was... Yeah.
And I think if we don't figure out that trusting God is going to be my number one default, this is where I'm going to lean 100% of the time. And also, I just don't think that blaming God is the right scenario. I also think that in different situations that people can also blame the devil when it actually should be looking at themselves. They're not reflecting themselves. Like when, let's just say, a relationship challenge comes up. that they either are blaming the other person or they're blaming the devil. This is spiritual warfare, spiritual attack going on here. And what they should be doing is they should be taking responsibility. What part did I play in this situation that can I fix it? Can I repent over it? Can I confess my wrongdoing? And how can I actually reconcile this with that relationship? If I don't look at it properly and make the decisions to change and blame the devil every single time, then this is going to be a repeat thing in my life, in relationships, over and over again. And I see it so many times with people where they didn't take the offensive of looking at themselves and repenting for their sin. They're repenting for their wrongdoing and making the changes. It's so much pride. It's so much easier to blame the devil than it is to take responsibility for it.
Yeah, and even the Bible, where it talks about in 1 Corinthians 4, I believe it's verses 7 to 12, somewhere in there, where it says, and Daryl Evans used to have a song with this verse in it.
You just dated yourself.
Yep. And Daryl Evans, and those of you who are our age know, and if you grew up Christian, you know the song, but I'm pressed but not crushed, persecuted, not abandoned, struck down, not destroyed, is what it says. And those things in order are actually talking about I'm pressed but not crushed. Like pressed means it's like it's pressing like your intellect, right? It's making your mind kind of like perplexed about something. It causes you to question God. It causes you to question yourself. It causes you to blame others. So all the things you just mentioned, that is one of the trials that comes. Like you're going to face serious pressure. And I think if we understand that on the front end before we go through something, that this is going to come at us. And when we're squeezed, what's inside of us is actually what comes out. That actually made me, from losing that, once we lost that baby, I remember thinking I got really serious about making sure that my beliefs and even the house, my spiritual house, was actually built on the rock. Because it shows up really quick that if you're built on sand, when something hard comes at you. So if you're pressed but not crushed, that means there's that hope that you actually won't be crushed, right? Persecuted, it's when you get things from others that come at you. So this verse kind of gives you some ideas of where it's coming from, right? Some things can come from. So if you're persecuted, it's like when people say things about you, there's things wrongly said, or maybe there's things even rightly said, but not understanding the whole thing or whatever, and that one is, pressed but not crushed, persecuted, not abandoned. That means you're not alone. So sometimes we have that feeling of loneliness, and struck down, not destroyed. To me, that means like these big life events that come at you to try to take you out. And I think everybody has a handful of those, 2 to 5 of those maybe. And you're not destroyed, but you're only not destroyed. You're only not crushed. You're only not abandoned if you lean into God. It's actually more about what you do in that trial than it is about the trial itself. And I just think that's like something to spur us on. Like when you go through something like losing a baby, like I remember feeling so hopeless and just so mentally and emotionally weak in that moment. And to have you say, hey, say, God, I trust you. I remember opening my mouth. I actually remember saying the words out my mouth and thinking, boy, this is hard to say right now. This is hard. And we were both crying. And I remember going home and telling the kids everything that happened. And that was really hard too. Excuse me. But one thing that I think is also interesting that I felt like as a husband and dad, you led us through, because I was so emotionally weak. I remember you doing that. And then we got home and we both really felt like it was important to have a process for our grief and an avenue, to put it somewhere, not to put it on God. And because I think over the coming days, when something like that happens and the thoughts start coming back, you have to remain with the original decision you had. And so we had that funeral you mentioned, and that helped all of our kids process that.
They all wrote letters.
Yep, they all wrote letters, and it also gave value to that child. Like we were recognizing that this is a life that we're going to live with in eternity. And we wanted our kids to recognize and see how you walk through something like this. And I remember a good friend came and we did even a service and we named him and all of that. And I just think that was so powerful. But do you have any other, because people go through lots of different things. Like you mentioned, they go through sickness and disease. They go through, those doctors' diagnoses. They might go through divorce. They might go through, fill in the blank, a prodigal child, whatever. There's different hardships that come at you. And how do you remain strong in those?
Yeah. So when I think of this, I am, number one, I am trusting, like I said, in what we talked about. But when it comes to our physical bodies deteriorating, sickness comes in our bodies. I've gone to many hospital rooms, and I hate going to the hospital rooms. I hate going when someone's dying. I just don't like it. And so I remember going to hospital rooms when this is the first time it really hit me. My best friend's dad, who I had grown up with, got in a car accident, and he is paralyzed from the neck down. And I go into the hospital rooms, and a bunch of other family members and friends are in their room, and they're praying for him. And the way they were praying for him made me question their prayers. And they were saying stuff like, if it's in your will, God, for him to be healed. If it's in your will, God, for him to recover. If it's in your will. So I just was so perplexed by the God that they were praying to compared to the God that I knew. The God that I read in the Bible was that by his stripes we were healed, that he died on the cross, paid the price, the penalty of sin and death, but also he paid the price for sickness and disease, so that by his stripes we're healed. So why would I be praying that if it's in your will when it is in his will, because he died for it? So when it comes to sickness and disease, I don't question God's will. Now, I may not have the answer. This is where I question. This is where I can have the tension. I trust you and I persevere in prayer and I don't give up in prayer, but I may not have the answer that I'm praying for. That doesn't mean that he doesn't will it. That just doesn't mean I don't have the answer. So I can still question that. So I'm going to still question that, but I'm not going to question, is this God's will? So I'm going to persevere in prayer. Luke 18:1 says, pray and don't give up. So there is in us, if I don't get an answer right away when it comes to sickness and disease, then I just quit because I don't persevere in prayer. So Luke 18 is about being a person that perseveres in prayer. Ask, keep asking. If you don't have the answer yet, keep asking. Don't quit, don't give up. So I'm going to rely on the word to tell me his will, and I'm going to persevere in that prayer, even if I don't have the solution that I'm wanting for.
Or the outcome.
The outcome that I'm wanting for. Now, when it comes to other things, I think my default is not even the devil. I think the best place to start is to look in the mirror. When it comes to, I got let go of the job. Well, is it actually you or was it the devil? I think you should look at yourself. Maybe you weren't adding up. Maybe you were a little lazy. Maybe you weren't doing your job properly. Maybe someone else could do your job better because you're not effective, efficient, and etc. So you should look at yourself first. And then when it comes to other things, especially relationships, it should be you. You should be looking at yourself first. I'm not going to be looking at the devil. I think that's the wrong direction.
You're talking in conflict in relationships or things that's not working out. Or
Right. So if something happens between you and I'm not going to, I think that's where the mistake happens in marriage too. I'm going to blame you. Well, you keep doing this. Well, you keep doing that.
If you would just stop doing this.
If you would just stop doing that. So I'm going to be looking at you instead of, well, what was my part? My tone. How I said it. Et cetera, et cetera. And so I think if we're not looking at ourselves and then coming to the table and saying, I'm sorry for how I said it. I'm sorry for my tone in it. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry I didn't get you. I didn't mean to. That simple stuff will make a dramatic difference in relationships. Yeah. So I think that's where fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, all the relationships, if they're not looking at themselves first, they're going to be making mistakes.
Well, and I think when it comes to other things like, let's say, sickness and disease, or like we talked about losing a baby, right? And we ended up losing another baby 2 years later, very similarly. And, so here we are going through it again. And in that instance, I actually almost died because there were some complications with the way the miscarriage happened. And so that caused...
You were bleeding to death.
I bled out. And that created a whole nother, thing for me. At least it's like I had a lot of fear after that. I almost went to eternity, and here I had 5 little kids, and, it was just, it was almost even past losing the baby at that point. It was about losing my own life. And then I had all these irrational fears. So it was like new fear that I never really experienced before entered into my heart. I remember even after that second miscarriage that we had, I was so confused that we even had it, because I thought at that point, and I had done all the things right to like fix what had happened previously.
With your health.
With my health. I was like, okay, I probably had low progesterone. I probably had this. I probably had that. There was different little beginnings of some autoimmune stuff that was discovered. And, here I went through these 2 years of different protocols and different health things, and we get pregnant. We're all excited, and that happened again. And so that can cause the enemy just doesn't play fair. And I think sometimes we're always asking those questions. Okay, was it the enemy? Was it God, disciplining me? And, was it, like you said, was it myself? Was it whatever, living in a fallen world? And sometimes we do have answers. Sometimes we can be like, okay, when it comes to a baby dying, I never believe that that's God. I do believe that's partly just a fallen world that we live in. But we come to some conclusions, but we have some mystery. And I think that's something that we have a hard time with people that being humans, we want to control things, and we want to be able to control outcomes. And it's like, I think that's what I felt with the second time around that it happened. It was like, oh my gosh, like the control that I thought I had was a mirage. I don't actually have control. So what do I do now when I don't have control? Like literally, I remember calling you one time. You took all the kids. It was just within a few days. You took all the kids somewhere in the car, and it was snowing outside. And I had this almost like a panic attack. Like it's snowing. I pictured you, the car slipping, and you getting in a car accident. And I remember calling you. Do you remember this?
No.
And I was like, "Are you guys okay? Like, are you in a car accident?" And you were like, "What? Are you in a car accident?" No, we're driving. And I was like, it was just, I feel like there is moments of vulnerability. The reason I say that, you have vulnerable moments where the enemy does come in those vulnerable moments. And
especially in the vulnerable moments of loss, especially when you lose a job or things like that are hard. That's when the devil's going to come in to play on your mind.
Yeah, so understanding what those different reasons are that why things happen, or even how the enemy can work, even if it wasn't the enemy that initially did that, although I'm sure he was happy about it, he's going to use that as an opportunity also to sidetrack you and derail you in your life. And so, I had to really work through some just different fear issues that I had really never experienced prior to that for several years that began to manifest in other ways. And, I guess to me, it's just like when you're going through things, and Romans 5 talks about this, James 1, count it all joy, like you mentioned, when you face trials of many kinds, because, when you face these trials, it says it develops perseverance, which develops hope. And it's a hope that actually doesn't disappoint. And I think sometimes we get stuck in a trial or a disappointment because it says it's a hope that doesn't disappoint. We're disappointed by something we weren't expecting, an outcome that happened. And when we stay in disappointment, not only can it turn to depression and bitterness and other things, but it also stops us from being able to experience that hope that doesn't disappoint. There's a hope you can have in the mystery, even if you don't get the answer. And I think as humans who want to control, we have sometimes a hard time understanding that we may not get all the answers. In fact, you probably won't.
Probably won't.
In fact, we're probably not going to know until we're standing before the Lord some of the reasons why certain things happened. But the goal for us now is to stay faithful. Like I remember in the story of Peter when he denied Jesus three times.
I'm going to add something.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I don't want to just be faithful. I think that's important. But I've seen a lot of people who stay faithful but are bitter. So I think that it's not only a goal to be faithful, but also soft and tender.
That's good.
I don't want to just go through it and grit my teeth through it and be faithful to God to, be a part of ministry in his kingdom. But I also want to be a soft and tender, to hear his voice, to forgive the people that have caused issues in my life, but to be tender so that I can walk into his presence, still receive from him at that very moment, just like I did 20 years ago. I want to be soft and tender. And that's why forgiveness is so important. Forgiving myself, forgiving other people as fast as possible so that I can be tender. I don't want to be tough. I remember there's a story in the Bible when King David became king. Mm-hmm. He sent two of his people from his army to just talk to a neighbor that was friends of his, that was friends of the old king. When he went, the neighbors thought, "Oh, this is David bringing in warriors to walk and look at our camp and look at our military." And so they shaved their face, they beat him up, they got him naked. So they were just giving him shame. David, when David heard about it from a distance, he said, go to the nearby town until your beard grows back, and here's some clothes. And he did that so that they could stay tender, stay soft. And so you're not bitter and ashamed. And so when things hard happens to us, we want to make sure that our hearts are soft towards God and soft towards people. Even if they've offended us and hurt us and betrayed us, how do I stay soft, not just be faithful?
And that's really a hard thing to do. Like, when the rubber meets the road, like if you're really hurting, when you're hurting, we always want to get away from the hurt. I think our human tendency is to avoid pain, right? So we do everything to avoid pain. We have coping mechanisms. We have escape things that we do. We have ways of thinking that we use. And if something doesn't make sense, all of a sudden we're stuck feeling this pain. But what we're promised is that Jesus is with us in it. And when we go through, he's a man of sorrows, and it's one of the descriptions of him actually is an emotion. He went through sorrows, and we're going to go through sorrows, but we're not alone, right? We're promised that we're not alone. And I was going to mention the story of Peter. He denied Jesus 3 times. And Jesus actually said to Peter, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times, but I'm going to pray that your faith doesn't fail you. And I think about that phrase that it actually makes me emotional to think about it. He prays for us when we're going through things that are hard, or even if we make a mistake or sin, and he's praying that your faith doesn't fail you. Because that's the number one thing that you're going to be tempted with, is to have your faith fail, right? Which is really ultimately quitting on God, quitting on your family, quitting on your marriage, quitting on whatever. And you actually have Jesus, the great intercessor, who's praying for us that our faith wouldn't fail. And that gives me a lot of courage just to think that maybe I don't have the answers to the different things that I want. And I have to just be okay with mystery. I have to be okay. Back to the God, I trust you. I'm just going to be okay with God, I trust you in this life, regardless if this makes no sense to me. And I still try to figure all of it out. Like everything we've ever gone through, what do I figure? It's like, your brain just wants to figure it out so you can protect yourself from pain so it doesn't go through it again.
Yeah, I think it's natural for us to try to question God and ask God all these things. I think that's normal. That's good. I just don't think blaming is a good thing. I think that's a wrong direction. But I would say this in closing, and maybe you can wrap it up for us. But for me, I would say Psalms 23 has been critical for understanding how do I go through stuff. Understanding that God is my good shepherd, that he leads me, he guides me in still waters, he restores my soul, and that he leads me in green pastures. All of this is important for us to know that we're going to go through the shadows of death in life, but it's just a shadow. As long as I keep in step with him, close to him, and his rod and his staff, they comfort me. They'll protect me. They'll guide me. They'll help me. They'll comfort me. And so Psalms 23, for hard things, really challenging things, are critical for my life on how I'm going to navigate these things that I don't have questions for, but I know that he's going to lead me and guide me and help me throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, Psalm 23, even that verse that chapter, I think it's one of the most common ones that often we don't read because we all have it memorized.
You kind of know it.
Yeah, if you grew up in church, you have it memorized. But the verse that says he restores my soul, that has been one that has stuck with me because I think sometimes one of the reasons we try to avoid pain or try to avoid these trials and all of the repercussions of them is because we think that we're going to stay in this pain, right? Or we think that it's on us to somehow not feel this excruciating, stab in our heart or whatever is going on. But when he restores our soul, he's the one who actually restores us, right? It's our mind, our will, our emotions that he restores. So you can actually have gone through horrific things and experience total restoration within you, even if the circumstance isn't restored, right? I think we often think that circumstance, because it was out of our control or, we can't get it back or whatever, it can't be fixed, that maybe we can't then experience. We need that to be fixed to be able to experience healing.
Right.
And that's not the case. Healing actually comes from him, from really, I love that, Psalm 23, and then the fact that he is the restorer of our soul. And I even think even further down in that chapter where he says he prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies. I mean, think about that. Like we're in the thick of war with everything coming at us. And he's just like, look at me, here's some food. Like just sit, relax, you know? So yeah, I mean, I just hope that people hearing this, there's so much more we could say about this, but when it comes, it's just one example of losing a baby. I think the principles are the same for pretty much anything. Don't let your faith be shaken. And remember that Jesus is the one that is actually praying that your faith would stay firm on him. So I'm just going to pray for everybody, if that's okay. Good. God, I just thank you for the listeners and even for the different things that they're going through. And Lord, I just pray right now that you will steady their faith, that you'll help them to realize that you are praying for them, that you are the one who is the great intercessor that is believing that their faith will not fail. And Lord, I just pray that even right now that you'll begin to give wisdom for different situations of decisions that need to be made that align with your word. And I just also pray for healing right now in any mind, the soul wounds, the different emotions and pain and memories of the past, and even things that are manifesting in the physical body. God, I just pray for total healing for those things and even relationships in Jesus' name.
Amen. So that's all we have. Do us a quick favor. If you know other people that would benefit from hearing conversations like this, do us a favor and share it with them because they might need something like this. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. Thank you so much.